The transport shuttle's landing gear cushioned our descent with a pneumatic hiss as we touched down on Terith's surface. Through the viewport, I could see a landscape bathed in an eerie blue-violet light. The twin suns hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the spaceport's crystalline architecture. All passengers disembark for processing, announced the automated system. Welcome to Terith, home of the undefeated Guardians. I hefted my duffel bag and joined the line of other off-worlders making their way toward the exit. The moment the airlock doors slid open, I felt it, the heavier gravity pulling at my limbs, the metallic tang in the air that tasted like copper pennies on my tongue. Everything about this planet felt heavy, significant. First time on Terith, asked a fellow passenger, a merchant with skin the color of burnished bronze and 4 eyes that blinked in alternating pairs. That obvious, huh? I replied, adjusting the strap of my bag. You've got that overwhelmed look. Word of advice, keep your head down, follow protocols to the letter. The Terith don't appreciate creativity when it comes to their customs. Thanks. I'm just here as a geological technician. 6-month contract to help with mineral surveys. Should be straightforward. The merchant made a clicking sound with his tongue that I interpreted as skepticism. Nothing is straightforward on Terith, especially not for off-worlders. We were herded into the processing chamber, a vast hall with towering ceilings and walls that seemed to pulse with soft bioluminescence. The room was divided into processing lanes, each one staffed by stern-faced officials. Overhead, announcements played in multiple languages. Attention, all visitors. Please be advised of the following regulations while on Terith. Direct eye contact with Guardians is forbidden unless given explicit permission. Sudden movements in the presence of Guardians may be interpreted as hostility. Under no circumstances should visitors attempt to touch or examine traditional Terith weapons. Violations of these protocols may result in immediate expulsion or more severe consequences. More severe consequences. The way the announcement lingered on those words made my skin prickle with unease. I found myself in line with a group of scientists from the Centauri Collective. They huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. I've heard the Guardians can kill with a single blow, whispered one, a woman with augmented eyes that whirred softly as they focused. It's not just strength, replied another, an older man with a shock of white hair. It's about honor. Everything on Terith revolves around their ancient code. Break it, and you're as good as dead. Let's just do our work and get out, said a third. 6 months will fly by if we keep our heads down. I nodded in agreement, though a familiar knot of anxiety was forming in my stomach. I had a habit of speaking before thinking, of making jokes to defuse tension. That personality trait had gotten me into trouble before, but never with stakes this high. The line moved slowly. After an hour of waiting, we were directed to stand in a row along a yellow line marked on the floor. A hush fell over the chamber as a group of Guardians entered through a set of ornate doors. They moved with liquid grace despite their imposing size. Each Guardian stood at least 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and powerful limbs. Their skin ranged from deep indigo to a blue so dark it was almost black, adorned with luminescent patterns that seemed to shift and pulse with their movements. But it was the female Guardian who caught my attention. She walked at the front of the group, her posture radiating authority. Her skin was a striking midnight blue, with patterns of light that traced along her cheekbones and down her neck like constellations. She wore her hair, iridescent and almost metallic in appearance, in elaborate braids interwoven with beads and small tokens that I assumed represented battle honors. Her armor was minimal but distinctive, shoulder guards of some reflective material, gauntlets that extended to her elbows, and a chest plate that seemed to be made of the same substance that comprised the building, crystalline but clearly stronger than diamond. At her hip hung a weapon that resembled a short staff, its surface inscribed with glowing runes. The lead officer of the processing station approached her with a deep bow. Guardian Ica, we are honored by your presence. These are the new arrivals requiring security clearance. Ica nodded, her expression impassive. We will inspect them. Her voice was deep and melodious, with an accent that made the words sound like they were being carved from stone. She began to move down the line, stopping before each visitor, her piercing silver eyes seeming to look straight through us. The heavy gravity, the stress of travel, the warnings, it all combined to make my heart race. As Aika approached me, I felt sweat beading on my forehead. She was intimidating, yes, but also fascinating. The patterns on her skin seemed to glow more intensely as she drew closer. She stopped directly in front of me, her height forcing me to look up. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she assessed me, and I noticed a small scar that traced the line of her jaw. Despite her fearsome appearance, there was something almost beautiful about the intensity of her focus. And then it happened. "You're actually pretty cute up close," I blurted out. The words hung in the air like a physical thing. Every sound in the vast chamber ceased. The other visitors stared at me in horror. The processing officers froze. Even the ambient lighting seemed to dim. Aika's expression transformed from detached assessment to cold fury in an instant. The luminescent patterns on her skin flared with sudden brightness, and her eyes, those silver eyes, became hard as steel. "You dare?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow filling the entire chamber. Before I could apologize, before I could even register what was happening, Aika moved. It wasn't just fast, it was like watching light itself bend. Her hand shot forward, fingers splayed in a distinctive pattern, and struck me directly in the center of my chest. The impact was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just force, it was as if every molecule in my body suddenly remembered what it was like to be at the heart of a star. Pain exploded outward from the point of impact, radiating through my ribcage in a wave of agony. I felt bones crack, felt the air driven from my lungs. The blow launched me backward. I flew at least 30 feet before crashing into the far wall and sliding to the floor in a crumpled heap. Through the haze of pain and shock, I heard gasps and murmurs. I tasted blood in my mouth. My vision darkened at the edges, and for a moment, I was certain I was dying. And yet, I wasn't. With monumental effort, I pushed myself up onto one elbow. My chest felt like it had been caved in, each breath sending shards of agony through my torso, but I was conscious. I was alive. The chamber had fallen into stunned silence. Aika stood where she had struck me, her expression one of disbelief. The other guardians had moved closer, their postures tense, hands hovering near their weapons. An older guardian with elaborate armor and facial markings stepped forward. His skin was a deeper blue than the others, and the luminescent patterns covered more of his visible skin, forming complex geometric designs. When he spoke, his voice resonated with authority. "This is unprecedented," he said, looking from Aika to me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "The Moonclaw strike has never failed to execute." With painful slowness, I managed to sit upright, clutching my chest. I'm sorry," I gasped. "I didn't mean any disrespect." The elder guardian approached me, his silver eyes examining me with intense curiosity. "You are death-forged," he declared, his tone suggesting this was both remarkable and disturbing. "No one survives the Moonclaw and continues to exist." Aika took a step forward, her hand returning to the weapon at her hip. "Elder Vexmore, this is impossible." The blow was true. "And yet he lives," Vexmore replied. "You know what the ancient law demands, Guardian Aika." Aika's expression darkened further, if that was possible. "I refuse." "You do not have that option," Vexmore said firmly. "The Death-Forged must be protected by the one whose Moonclaw failed until they can be properly judged. This has been our way for millennia." Aika's jaw clenched, the luminescent patterns on her skin pulsing with what I assumed was anger. "Then I will escort him to the Temple of Judgment immediately." "After he has been treated," Vexmore corrected. "The trial cannot be administered to one so gravely injured." Two medical officers approached cautiously, helping me to my feet. As they supported me toward what I assumed was the medical wing, I caught a final glimpse of Aika. Her eyes burned with barely contained rage, fixed upon me as if I were the most despicable creature in the universe. And that was how a simple geological technician with an unfortunate habit of speaking without thinking, became bound by ancient Tarith law to the warrior who had just tried to kill me. The medical chamber was unlike any hospital room I'd ever seen. Instead of beds, there were shallow pools filled with a luminescent gel-like substance. The walls pulsed with the same bioluminescence as the main chamber, but here the light was softer, more soothing. "Immerse yourself," instructed one of the medical officers, gesturing to the nearest pool. "The recovery matrix will assess and treat your injuries." With their help, I lowered myself into the strange liquid. It was warm and had the consistency of honey, yet I didn't feel sticky. As soon as I was fully immersed, the substance began to glow more intensely around my injured chest. The pain gradually subsided to a dull ache. Elder Vexmore entered while I was being treated, his imposing figure standing at the edge of the pool. "You should have died," he stated matter-of-factly. Sorry to disappoint," I replied, unsure how to respond to such a blunt assessment. A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh. "The Moonclaw is not merely a fighting technique. It is a sacred execution, reserved for the gravest offenses against our honor. When delivered properly, as Guardian Ica surely did, it severs the connection between body and spirit. No one survives it." "What does Death Forge mean?" I asked, wincing as I felt my ribs shifting, knitting back together under the influence of the healing gel. In our ancient texts, there are references to individuals whose spirits are forged in such a way that they cannot be severed by conventional means. They're exceedingly rare. Only 3 have been documented in our entire history. His eyes studied me intently. "And now it seems you are the 4th. But I'm just a human from Earth. There's nothing special about me." "That remains to be seen," Vexmore replied. "According to our law, when a guardian delivers the Moonclaw and the recipient survives, a sacred bond is formed. The guardian becomes responsible for the death forged until they can be judged at the Temple of Arbitration." "Judged for what?" "Worthiness," Vexmore said simply. "If you pass the trial, you will be accepted among us with high honor. If you fail, Guardian Ica will be permitted to complete what her Moonclaw began." The implications sank in slowly. "So either I pass this test, or she gets to kill me anyway?" "That is correct. And where is this temple?" "Beyond the Dead Waste, a 3-day journey from our city. It is a sacred place, not easily reached." Vexmore's expression became grave. "The journey itself is a part of the trial. Many dangers lurk in the waste." "Wonderful," I muttered. Vexmore turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "You should know that your condition makes you valuable. There are those who would seek to capture or kill you for study. The Syndicate, in particular, has long sought to understand and exploit Tarith physiology and spiritual practices." "Who are the Syndicate?" "Criminals who traffic in the forbidden. They harvest organs and artifact from my people to sell on the black market. A death forge would be a prize beyond measure for them." With that ominous warning, he departed. I was left to soak in the healing gel, contemplating just how thoroughly I had ruined my simple 6-month geological survey contract. After several hours in the recovery matrix, my chest no longer felt as if it had been caved in by a sledgehammer. The medical officers helped me out of the pool and provided me with new clothing, form-fitting garments similar to what the Tarith themselves wore, but designed for human physiology. Ica was waiting outside the medical chamber, her posture rigid, her expression still cold with barely contained fury. Without a word, she gestured for me to follow her. We walked through the crystalline corridors of the processing station, other Tarith and off-worlders alike giving us a wide berth. I tried several times to initiate conversation, but Ica ignored me completely. Eventually, we reached what appeared to be an armory. Inside, various weapons and pieces of equipment were displayed on luminescent shelves. Ica began selecting items, methodically placing them in a pack. "I want to apologize," I said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "I didn't understand your customs, but that's no excuse." I spoke without thinking. Ica paused, then continued her preparations without acknowledging my words. "Look, I understand you're angry. You understand nothing," she finally replied, her voice cold. Your thoughtless words have bound me to you through ancient laws I cannot break. My honor is now tied to a weakling who does not comprehend the gravity of his offense. Then help me understand, I urged. I don't want to be in this situation any more than you do. Aika turned to face me, her silver eyes piercing. The term you used, cute, it implies weakness, insignificance. To call a guardian such a thing is to declare them unworthy of respect or fear. It is among the highest insults in our culture. I winced. I didn't mean it that way at all. In human culture, it could be a compliment. Your cultural ignorance does not absolve you, she said flatly. Now I must protect the very person who dishonored me, guide you through the dead waste, and present you for judgment. Only then will my obligation be fulfilled. She handed me what looked like a thin suit of armor, though the material was unlike any I'd seen before. Flexible, but with a metallic sheen. Environmental protection. The waste will kill you within hours without it. When do we leave? At first. Light tomorrow. The journey will take 3 days if we maintain a steady pace. Her eyes narrowed. Do not slow me down. As Aika turned back to her preparations, a young Tarith officer approached, speaking to her in their native language. A series of melodious syllables punctuated by clicks and tones that human vocal cords probably couldn't replicate. Whatever he said caused Aika's posture to stiffen even more. After the officer left, I asked, what was that about? For a moment, I thought she would ignore me again, but then she replied, there are reports of syndicate activity near the edge of the waste. We may encounter resistance. The syndicate, Elder Vexmore mentioned them. He said they might be interested in me because I'm death-forged. They would be, Aika confirmed grimly. The organs of a guardian fetch high prices in certain markets. A death-forged would be invaluable. The casual way she discussed the possibility of my dismemberment sent a chill down my spine. We'll have to watch out for bounty hunters. I will escort you to the Temple of Judgment, she stated firmly. What happens there depends on your worthiness. But until then, yes, we must be vigilant. As we finished gathering supplies, Aika fixed me with a hard stare. I will fulfill my duty under the ancient law, but make no mistake, if you fail the trial, I will not hesitate to complete what the Moonclaw began. With that cheerful thought to sustain me, I followed my reluctant protector to temporary quarters to rest before our journey into the dead waste. Dawn on Tarith was unlike anything I'd experienced. The twin suns rose almost simultaneously, one a deep crimson, the other a pale yellow, casting the landscape in shades of purple and gold. The effect was both beautiful and alien, a reminder that I was very far from home. Aika was already waiting at the city's edge when I arrived, her tall figure silhouetted against the rising suns. She wore lightweight armor that seemed to absorb and reflect the morning light, and her weapon, the staff-like implement I'd seen earlier, was secured at her hip. You're late, she said, though by my chronometer I was exactly on time. Sorry, I replied, deciding it wasn't worth arguing. I was already wearing the environmental suit she'd provided, which regulated my body temperature and filtered the air I breathed. Even with its assistance, the heavier gravity of Tarith made every movement an effort. Without another word, Aika turned and began walking toward the vast expanse of the dead waste. From the city's edge, it looked like an endless sea of crystalline sand, shimmering under the dual suns. Jagged rock formations jutted up sporadically, like the spines of buried creatures. Stay within 5 meters of me at all times, Aika instructed as we crossed the invisible boundary between civilization and wilderness. The environmental suit will protect you from the worst of the waste, but it has limitations. As we ventured deeper into the dead waste, the city behind us gradually disappeared from view. The crystalline sand crunched beneath our feet, occasionally emitting tiny flashes of light, as if we were walking on frozen lightning. The air, even filtered through my suit, carried a sharp, metallic taste. So, have you been a guardian long? I asked, trying to break the oppressive silence. Aika continued walking without acknowledging my question. I've been a geological technician for about 7 years. I continued, undeterred. Mostly worked on Mars and the Jovian moons before this. Tareth is my first assignment outside our solar system. Still nothing. Look, we're going to be stuck together for 3 days. We might as well talk. Aika stopped suddenly, turned to face me. Your constant chatter serves no purpose. Focus on conserving your energy. The waste becomes more dangerous as we proceed. As if to emphasize her point, a hot gust of wind swept over us, carrying particles of crystal that pinged against my suit. Aika seemed unfazed, but I felt the temperature regulation of my suit working harder to compensate. These environmental conditions, I said, trying a different approach, are they natural or the result of some catastrophe? For a moment, I thought she would ignore me again, but then she replied, both. The dead waste was created during the Great Severance, when our ancestors fought against the Void Bearers. The energies released transformed this entire region. It was the most information she'd volunteered since our journey began. Encouraged, I asked, who are the Void Bearers? Ancient enemies. That is all you need to know. And just like that, the brief moment of openness was gone. We continued in silence for several hours. The twin suns climbed higher in the sky, and despite my suit's cooling systems, I began to feel the heat. Sweat trickled down my back, and my still healing chest ached with each breath. Aika maintained a punishing pace, never slowing, or showing signs of fatigue. I struggled to keep up, unwilling to ask for rest for fear of confirming her low opinion of my capabilities. Around midday, we reached a cluster of towering rock formations that provided some shelter from the suns. Aika finally stopped, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. We will rest here briefly, she announced. Drink water. Your human physiology requires frequent hydration. I gratefully sank onto a flat rock, drawing water from my suit's integrated supply system. Aika remained standing, vigilant, her gaze constantly sweeping our surroundings. Thank you, I said after taking several long drinks. For stopping, I mean. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. Your collapse would delay us further. Such concern, I muttered under my breath. To my surprise, Aika's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile, though it vanished so quickly I couldn't be sure. The patterns on your skin, I said, gesturing to the luminescent markings that traced her face and exposed arms. What do they mean? Aika was silent for so long that I thought she was ignoring me again. But then she said, they are soul graphs, a record of one's lineage, achievements, and spiritual connection. Each guardian's patterns are unique. They're beautiful, I said, then hastily added, I mean impressive. Impressive in their complexity. Aika gave me a look that suggested she wasn't fooled by my correction, but chose not to take offense this time. Our rest was cut short by a distant sound, a mechanical whine that seemed out of place in the crystalline desert. Aika was instantly alert, her hand moving to her weapon. Raiders, she said, her voice low. Get up. We need to move. Raiders? Out here. The dead waste is an ideal place for ambushes. No witnesses, no help. Aika was already moving, heading toward a narrow pass between two towering rock formations. Stay close. We hurried through the pass, the sound of engines growing louder behind us. Aika suddenly pulled me down behind a large boulder, her strength making me stumble. Stay down, she ordered. If they pass by without noticing us, we avoid unnecessary conflict. I peered around the edge of the boulder. A group of 6 figures on sleek, hovering vehicles were approaching our position. They didn't look like Tareth. Their proportions were wrong, and they wore patchwork armor and breathing apparatuses. Are those humans? I whispered. Various species. Mercenaries, most likely. Hired by the Syndicate. Aika's voice was tense. They're scanning for life signs. As if on cue, one of the raiders pointed in our direction. The group immediately changed course, heading straight for our hiding place. So much for avoiding conflict, I muttered, reaching for the small energy pistol I'd been provided as part of my equipment. Aika didn't respond. Instead, she closed her eyes briefly, and the luminescent patterns on her skin began to pulse with increased intensity. When she opened her eyes again, they seemed to glow with inner light. Stay behind me, she instructed, drawing her weapon. Up close, I could see that what I'd taken for a simple staff was actually a complex device, with internal components visible through translucent sections of its structure. The raiders spread out as they approached, cutting off potential escape routes. Their leader, a burly figure with cybernetic enhancements visible along one side of his face, called out in a language I didn't understand. Ika replied in the same language, her tone making it clear that whatever he'd said wasn't well received. The raider leader laughed, saying something else while pointing directly at me. The rest of his group joined in the laughter, weapons trained on us. What do they want? I asked quietly. You, Ika replied. They've heard rumors of a death forged. And they're working for the syndicate? Yes. The leader says he'll let me live if I hand you over. He believes I'm escorting you as a prisoner, not a protectee. That's actually a convenient misunderstanding. Couldn't you pretend to agree? Get them to lower their guard. Ika shot me a withering look. I am a guardian. We do not deceive, even enemies. Right. Honor. Got it, I said, tightening my grip on my energy pistol. So what's the plan? I will engage them directly. You will provide covering fire from this position. Do not attempt to join the melee. You would only interfere with my movements. Before I could respond, Ika was in motion. She moved with the same impossible speed I'd witnessed in the processing chamber, but now with lethal intent. The luminescent patterns on her skin blazed like fire as she charged directly at the raiders. The first raider barely had time to raise his weapon before Ika's staff connected with his chest. There was a flash of blue-white energy, and he was thrown backward, crashing into the crystalline sand with enough force to send up a shower of glittering particles. I snapped out my momentary awe and began firing at the raiders who were trying to flank Ika. My aim was decent. Years of mandatory security training for off-world assignments had ensured that, but the raiders were fast and clearly experienced. Ika was a blur of motion at the center of the conflict. Her fighting style was unlike anything I'd seen before, fluid like water one moment, devastating as lightning the next. Her staff seemed to extend and contract at her command, striking with precision at vital points. 3 raiders were already down, but the remaining 3 had adapted to her tactics. They coordinated their attacks, forcing Ika to defend from multiple angles. One of them managed to graze her arm with an energy blast, leaving a scorch mark on her armor. I saw an opening and took it, firing at a raider who was circling behind Ika. My shot caught him in the leg, causing him to stumble. Ika immediately capitalized on his momentary weakness, spinning to deliver a blow that sent him sprawling. The tide seemed to be turning in our favor when one of the raiders threw a small, spherical device. It detonated with a blinding flash and a surge of energy that temporarily disrupted my suit systems. Through watering eyes, I saw Ika falter, her movements momentarily slowed. The raider leader seized the opportunity, charging at her with some kind of energy blade. I shouted a warning, but it was too late. The blade sliced across Ika's side, drawing a line of luminescent blue blood. Despite the injury, Ika recovered quickly. She dropped into a low stance, her staff twirling in a complex pattern. The luminescent markings on her skin pulsed in sync with her movements, and I realized she was preparing for something significant. "Get down," she called to me, her voice carrying over the chaos of battle. I ducked behind the boulder just as Ika slammed her staff into the crystalline ground. There was a moment of absolute silence, followed by a shockwave of energy that rippled outward in all directions. The sand itself seemed to rise and crystallize further, forming jagged spines that impaled the remaining raiders or sent them flying. When I dared to look again, all 6 raiders were down, and Ika was leaning on her staff, one hand pressed to her injured side. I rushed to her, concerned by the amount of luminescent blood seeping between her fingers. "You're hurt. It is minor," she said, though her breathing was labored. "Check if any of them still live." I cautiously approached the fallen raiders. Most were clearly dead, their bodies impaled by crystal formations or bearing the distinctive energy burns from Ika's weapon. But the leader was still breathing, though barely, pinned beneath his overturned hover vehicle. "This one's alive," I called to Ika, who limped over to join me. The raider's eyes flickered open. when he saw Ika standing over him. He laughed weakly, coughing up dark fluid. "The Syndicate knows about the Death Forged," he said in accented English. "They'll send more, better equipped. You can't protect him all the way to the temple." "Who hired you?" Ika demanded. The Raider's damaged cybernetics sparked along his jawline. "Commander Vex. He wants the Death Forged, alive, for study." His eyes shifted to me. "But he'll settle for pieces." A final, rattling breath escaped him, and he was gone. Ika straightened, wincing slightly. "We need to move. The energy discharge will attract attention." "You need medical attention first," I insisted, gesturing to her wound. "There is no time. The Syndicate will have tracking systems monitoring the waste for energy signatures." That blast was distinctive. "At least let me help bandage it," I said, reaching for the medical supplies in my pack. Ika hesitated, then nodded curtly. Quickly, as I applied a gel-like substance from my medical kit to her wound, I asked, "Who is Commander Vex?" "A former Guardian," Ika replied, her expression darkening. "He was exiled for violating our most sacred laws. Now he leads the Syndicate's operations in this sector. A Terith working against his own people. It is rare, but not unprecedented. Those who cannot uphold our code sometimes turn against it entirely." She looked at the fallen raiders. "Vex knows our ways, our weaknesses. That makes him more dangerous than typical Syndicate commanders." I finished sealing the wound with a transparent bandage that molded to Ika's skin. "That should hold until we can get proper treatment." Ika tested her range of motion, seeming satisfied that the injury wouldn't impede her too severely. "Your assistance was adequate during the battle," she said, which I took to be high praise given the source. "I've had some combat training. Nothing like yours, obviously, but enough to not be completely useless." She studied me for a moment, her silver eyes unreadable. "Perhaps you are not entirely without merit." Coming from Ika, it felt like winning a medal. I try not to look too pleased. We salvaged what we could from the Raiders' supplies. Additional water, energy cells for my pistol, and a small device that Ika explained would help mask our life signs from detection. Then we continued our journey, albeit at a slightly slower pace to accommodate Ika's injury, though she would never have admitted that was the reason. As the twin suns began their descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the crystalline landscape, I noticed a change in Ika's demeanor. She seemed more willing to answer my questions, though her responses remained terse. "How much farther to the temple?" I asked as we navigated through a field of crystal formations that resembled frozen waves. "We are halfway there," Ika replied. "We will need to find shelter soon. The waste becomes dangerous after dark." "Dangerous how?" "Temperature drops to lethal levels. Crystal storms. Predators." "Predators? What kind of creature survives out here?" "Nothing you wish to encounter," she said grimly. As if on cue, a haunting cry echoed across the waste, raising the hair on the back of my neck. Ika immediately changed direction, heading toward a cluster of larger rock formations in the distance. "Those outcroppings will provide shelter," she explained. "We can defend a single entrance more effectively than open ground." By the time we reached the rock formation, darkness was falling rapidly. The temperature was already dropping, and my suit's heating system activated automatically. Ika led me to a narrow opening in the rocks, which widened into a small, cave-like space inside. "This will serve," she said, examining the interior. "Set up the barrier field while I check the perimeter." I unpacked a small device from our supplies and activated it, creating an energy barrier across the cave entrance that would keep out the worst of the cold and, hopefully, any curious predators. Ika returned shortly, seeming satisfied with her inspection. "We will take turns standing watch," she said, settling cross-legged near the entrance. "You will sleep first. Your human physiology requires more rest than mine." I wanted to argue, but knew she was right. The day's events had taken their toll, and my still-healing chest ached dully. I arranged my pack as a makeshift pillow and lay down on the hard ground. "Ika," I said, just as I was drifting off. "What?" "Thank you for saving my life today." There was a long pause before she replied. I am bound by the ancient law to protect you until the temple. Nothing more. But something in her tone had softened just slightly. It wasn't much, but it was progress. I fell asleep watching the luminescent patterns on her skin pulse gently in the darkness, like stars in a private constellation. I awakened to Aika gently shaking my shoulder, her expression alert. Outside our shelter, one of Taritha's sons was just beginning to crest the horizon, bathing the crystalline landscape in pale golden light. We need to move, she said quietly. I detected surveillance drones during my watch. The syndicate is tracking us. I sat up, wincing at the stiffness in my muscles from sleeping on hard ground. How far behind are they? Unknown, but we must assume they're converging on our position. Aika was already packing up our meager supplies. The barrier field masked our life signs temporarily, but they will have analyzed the raiders' last transmission. We quickly broke camp and set out, heading deeper into the dead waste. The terrain became increasingly treacherous. Jagged crystal formations jutted from the sand like teeth, and deep fissures forced us to make constant detours. The twin suns beat down mercilessly, their combined heat making the air shimmer despite my suit's cooling systems. How's your injury? I asked Aika as we navigated around a particularly large crystal formation. Functional, she replied, though I noticed she favored her uninjured side. The bandage I'd applied was still in place, now stained with dried, blue luminescent blood. We maintained a brisk pace throughout the morning, pausing only briefly to drink water and check our surroundings. Aika remained vigilant, her gaze constantly scanning the horizon and the sky above us. Around midday, we reached a vast expanse where the crystalline sand gave way to a field of obsidian-like glass, its surface reflecting the suns with blinding intensity. Heat rose from it in visible waves. We must cross, Aika stated, surveying the glass plain. It is the most direct route to the temple. How wide is it? I asked, shielding my eyes against the glare. Approximately 5 kilometers. The surface temperature will damage your suit if we linger too long. I swallowed hard. Then I guess we'd better not linger. Stepping onto the glass plain was like walking on the surface of a star. Despite my suit's protection, I felt the heat seeping through the soles of my boots. Each step required careful placement. The surface was unnaturally smooth in some areas, treacherously cracked in others. We had made it perhaps a kilometer into the glass plain when Aika suddenly stopped, her head tilted as if listening. What is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Aircraft, she said, pointing to the horizon behind us. Syndicate transport. I followed her gaze and saw it. A dark speck against the sky, growing larger by the second. The aircraft was sleek and predatory, clearly designed for speed and combat. Run, Aika commanded, and we both broke into a sprint across the treacherous glass surface. Running in Taritha's heavier gravity was already challenging. Doing so on an unstable, superheated surface while injured made it nearly impossible to keep pace with Aika. My chest burned with each breath, the partially healed fractures from Aika's moonclaw protesting the sudden exertion. The aircraft gained on us rapidly. Through the distortion of heat waves, I could now make out its details, a matte black hull with angular surfaces designed to deflect scanning beams. It was a hunter's vessel, built for pursuing prey across the dead waste. We won't outrun it, I gasped, stumbling as my boot caught on a crack in the glass. Aika glanced back, assessing the situation with cold precision. There, she said, pointing to a jagged outcropping of black glass ahead. It will provide minimal cover. We changed course, making for the outcropping. As we ran, Aika drew her staff, the weapon extending to its full length in her grip. The luminescent patterns on her skin began to pulse more rapidly, like a heartbeat accelerating for battle. We reached the outcropping just as the aircraft closed to within firing range. A burst of energy struck the glass nearby, sending up a spray of molten shards that hissed and crystallized in the air. Stay down, Aika ordered, positioning herself between me and the approaching threat. The aircraft circled once, then hovered about 100 meters away. A hatch opened in its underside, and 4 figures descended on rappelling lines, all wearing the distinctive armor of Syndicate operatives, but with modifications for the harsh environment of the Dead Waste. Guardian Ica, called one of the figures, clearly the leader. His voice was amplified to carry across the distance. Surrender the Death Forged, and you may return to your city unharmed. This is the only offer you will receive. Ica's response was to activate her staff, causing energy to crackle along its length. The patterns on her skin blazed with battle readiness. They're trying to separate us, I said quietly. If they wanted us both, they'd just use the ship's weapons. Commander Vex wants you alive, Ica replied. These are his elite hunters. They will attempt to incapacitate you while eliminating me. She handed me her scanning device. If I fall, use this to find the temple. It is programmed with the coordinates. I'm not leaving you behind, I protested. Ica's silver eyes flashed. Your sentiment is misplaced. I fulfill my duty, nothing more. The Syndicate operatives began to advance, spreading out to approach from multiple angles. Their movements were coordinated and precise, clearly professionals, not ordinary mercenaries like the raiders we'd encountered earlier. On my signal, move to the left side of the outcropping, Ica instructed. I will engage them frontally to create an opening. I nodded, readying my energy pistol. It felt woefully inadequate against the heavy weaponry the operatives carried, but it was better than nothing. Ica closed her eyes briefly, and the luminescent patterns on her skin began to change, shifting into more angular, aggressive configurations. When she opened her eyes again, they glowed with an inner light that was almost blinding in its intensity. Now, she said, and launched herself toward the approaching operatives with a speed that seemed impossible. I moved as instructed, keeping low and using the irregular terrain for cover. Behind me, I heard the distinctive hum of Ica's staff as it discharged energy, followed by shouts of pain and surprise from the Syndicate operatives. From my new position, I could see Ica engaging 3 of the operatives simultaneously. Her movements were a blur of lethal precision, her staff leaving trails of blue-white energy in its wake. One operative was already down, his armor smoking from a direct hit. But where was the 4th? I got my answer when a shadow fell over me. I looked up to see the lead operative standing above me, his helmet's visor reflecting my startled expression. Death Forged, he said, his voice distorted by his helmet's audio system. Commander Vex sends his regards. I raised my pistol, but he knocked it from my hand with a casual swipe. Before I could react further, he had me pinned against the glass outcropping, one arm across my throat. The commander has questions about your unique constitution, the operative continued. He is particularly interested in how you survive the Moonclaw. The examination process may be uncomfortable. With my free hand, I groped blindly along the ground, hoping to find something, anything that could serve as a weapon. My fingers closed around a shard of the glass-like material, its edge sharp enough to cut even through my suit's glove. I drove the shard upward with all my strength, finding the gap between the operative's helmet and body armor. He let out a gurgling cry as luminescent blue blood, Tarith blood, spilled down his armor. He staggered backward, his hand going to his throat. As his helmet tilted upward, I caught a glimpse of his face through the visor, the distinctive blue skin and silver eyes of a Tarith. You're not Syndicate, I realized. You're Tarith. Exiles, came Ica's voice from behind me. She had dispatched the other operatives and now stood watching as the leader sank to his knees, still clutching his throat. Guardians who betrayed their oath to serve Commander Vex. The dying Tarith looked up at Ica, his eyes filled with hate. The old ways are dying, he gasped. Vex offers freedom from ancient chains. He offers dishonor, Ica replied coldly. The exile's laugh turned into a wet cough. You still don't understand. The Death Forged changes everything. The temple will fall. His body went limp as the life faded from his eyes. Ica knelt beside the fallen Tarith, placing a hand over his heart. She spoke words in her native language, a brief, solemn utterance that I took to be a death rite. He was Guardian trained, I observed, Yes, Ika confirmed, rising to her feet. That is why the Syndicate is so dangerous. These exiles know our techniques, our weaknesses. She looked at me with a new intensity. And they believe your existence threatens our entire way of life. Why? What's so important about being death-forged? Ika was silent for a moment, seeming to weigh her words carefully. Our culture is built upon absolute truths. The Moonclaw kills. That is one such truth. If it can fail, she left the implication hanging. Then other truths might be questioned as well. I finished for her. She nodded, her expression grave. We must reach the temple before more exiles find us. The aircraft will have transmitted our location. I looked at the fallen Tarith, then at the blood on my gloved hand. I've never killed anyone before. I admitted, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Ika's expression softened slightly. He chose his path, as did you, when you acted to survive. After a pause, she added, you fought well. For a human. Coming from Ika, it felt like the highest praise. We salvaged what we could from the exiles' equipment. Additional water, energy cells, and a small shield generator that would help protect us from the worst of the elements. The aircraft had retreated after the operatives fell, likely returning to report to Commander Vex. How much farther to the temple? I asked as we prepared to continue our journey across the glass plain. We should reach it by nightfall tomorrow, if we maintain pace and avoid further confrontations. Ika replied, scanning the horizon. The most dangerous part of the waste lies ahead. More dangerous than what we've already faced. The crystalline maelstrom, she said, pointing to a distant distortion in the air, like heat waves, but more structured, almost geometric in its patterns. A perpetual storm of crystal shards and energy discharges. We must pass through its outer edge to reach the temple. I swallowed hard. Of course we do. We set out again, crossing the remainder of the glass plain before the twin suns began their descent. Beyond the plain, the terrain changed once more, becoming a labyrinth of towering crystal spires and deep ravines. Navigation became increasingly difficult as the light faded. We will make camp here, Ika decided, indicating a narrow crevice between two spires that offered some protection from the elements. The maelstrom's influence grows stronger after dark. As if to emphasize her point, a distant rumble echoed across the landscape, followed by a flash of blue-white light within the geometric distortion on the horizon. The air carried a sharp, electric scent, and the crystals around us seemed to resonate in response, emitting soft, discordant tones. We set up our camp quickly, establishing the barrier field at the entrance to our shelter. Ika insisted on taking the first watch again, despite her injury and the day's exertions. You need rest too, I pointed out, especially with that wound. I require less rest than humans, she replied, but I could see the fatigue in her posture, the slight dimming of the luminescent patterns on her skin. At least let me check your injury before you take watch, I insisted. After a moment's hesitation, Ika nodded. She removed the upper portion of her armor, revealing the bandaged. Wound on her side, I carefully peeled back the dressing, relieved to see that the cut was already beginning to heal, the edges sealing with a faint luminescence. Your physiology is remarkable, I commented as I applied a fresh bandage. Human wounds take much longer to heal. Guardian biology is enhanced for combat and survival, Ika explained. Our cellular regeneration is linked to our soul grafts. She gestured to the luminescent patterns on her skin. So the patterns aren't just decoration? They are channels for life, energy, physical manifestations of our spiritual essence. She allowed herself a small smile at my fascination. Much as your blood carries oxygen, our patterns carry what you might call our soul. It was the most personal information Ika had shared with me, and I sensed a subtle shift in her demeanor. The rigid formality was still there, but less pronounced. Thank you, I said, for explaining, and for protecting me today. Ika's silver eyes studied my face. You saved my life as well. The exile would have struck from behind had you not engaged him. We make a decent team, I ventured. Perhaps, she conceded, though I could have sworn I saw the ghost of a smile touch her lips before she turned away to take her position at the entrance to our shelter. I settled down to rest, watching the luminescent patterns on Aika's skin pulse gently in the darkness. They seemed to shift and change, responding to her thoughts and emotions in ways I was only beginning to understand. Despite the danger surrounding us, despite the uncertainty of what awaited at the temple, I felt an odd sense of peace in that moment. For the first time since my disastrous cute comment, I wasn't just a burden Aika was obligated to protect. I was a companion she might actually be beginning to respect. With that comforting thought, I drifted into sleep, the distant rumble of the crystalline maelstrom providing an otherworldly lullaby. The second day of our journey through the dead waste dawned with an ominous brilliance. The twin suns rose behind the crystalline maelstrom, their light fracturing through the storm into thousands of rainbow-hued beams that danced across the landscape. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Aika woke me just before sunrise, her expression tense. The maelstrom has intensified overnight. We must move quickly to cross its outer boundary before it expands further. I could see the concern in her eyes. Is that unusual? The storm follows patterns, cycles of expansion and contraction. But this... She gestured toward the geometric distortion that now dominated the horizon. This is premature. Something is influencing it. The syndicate? Perhaps. Aika handed me a nutrient bar from our supplies. Eat. We need to maintain our strength. We broke camp efficiently and set out, picking our way through the increasingly treacherous terrain. As we drew closer to the maelstrom, the air itself seemed to change, becoming charged with static electricity that made the hair on my arm stand on end despite my environmental suit. The crystals around us responded to the energy, resonating with tones that grew louder and more discordant the closer we got to the storm. Some began to glow with internal light, pulsing in rhythm with the distant lightning-like flashes from the maelstrom. The ancients believed the maelstrom to be a living entity, Aika said as we paused to survey our path forward. A guardian spirit that protects the temple from those unworthy to approach it. Do you believe that? She considered the question seriously. I believe there is consciousness in all things. The maelstrom may not think as we do, but it perceives, reacts. She pointed to a narrow path that wound between two massive crystal formations. That is our route. The temple lies beyond the maelstrom's edge. The path gradually descended into a ravine, the walls rising steep and jagged on either side. Crystal formations grew more dense and complex, forming structures that resembled frozen waterfalls or elaborate chandeliers. Their resonance had become a constant chorus, vibrating through my bones. As we progressed, I noticed a subtle change in Aika. The luminescent patterns on her skin were responding to the environment, shifting and pulsing in harmony with the crystals around us. She moved with increased grace, as if drawing energy from the resonance. Your patterns, I said, gesturing to her skin. They're changing. We are entering sacred space, she explained. The soul graphs respond to the temple's proximity. All guardians experience this. The ravine narrowed further, forcing us to proceed in single file. Aika led the way, her staff extended to test the stability of the ground before us. The crystal formations had become so dense that they formed a canopy overhead, filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns that shifted and changed with the maelstrom's distant pulses. We had been walking for perhaps an hour when Aika suddenly stopped, raising a hand in warning. Listen, she said softly. At first, I heard nothing beyond the constant crystalline chorus. Then, faintly, I detected a mechanical whine, the sound of engines different from the aircraft we'd encountered before. Ground transports, Aika confirmed, her expression grim. Syndicate forces have reached the temple before us. My heart sank. How many? Unknown. But they must have taken a different route, one that bypassed the waste entirely. She considered our options. We cannot turn back. The maelstrom is expanding behind us. So we go forward and face whatever's waiting? Aika nodded, but with caution. If Commander Vex himself is present. She didn't need to finish the thought. From everything I learned, Vex was a formidable opponent, especially for Aika, who was still recovering from her injury. We continued along the ravine, moving more stealthily now. The mechanical sounds grew louder as we approached what appeared to be the end of the path, a towering archway formed by two leaning crystal spires, beyond which lay the edge of the maelstrom itself. Aika motioned for me to remain hidden while she scouted ahead. I watched as she moved silently to the archway, her form blending with the shadows cast by the crystal formations. After a few moments, she returned, her expression even more serious than before. Syndicate forces have established a perimeter around the temple approach, she reported. At least 20 operatives, heavily armed. And Commander Vex is among them. Can you describe it? I asked, curious about this former guardian who now led our enemies. Tall, even for a Terith. His soul grafts have been modified, corrupted. They glow red instead of blue, and form patterns that no guardian would willingly bear. Aika's voice held a mixture of disgust and something else, perhaps fear. He wears specialized armor that enhances his already considerable strength. What's his goal? Why try to capture me rather than just kill us both? The Deathforge phenomenon is extremely rare. Vex likely believes studying you could reveal secrets about Guardian physiology, perhaps even about the nature of the Moonclaw itself. Aika's eyes narrowed. Knowledge he could weaponize against my people. I digested this information, trying to think strategically. So we need a diversion. Something to draw his forces away from the temple entrance, so we can slip through. Aika studied me with new respect. Yes, and I believe the maelstrom itself may provide what we need. She explained that the crystal formations around us could be manipulated to affect the maelstrom's behavior. By carefully breaking certain key crystals, we could potentially trigger a localized surge in the storm's activity, creating the diversion we needed. The risk is considerable, she warned. If we miscalculate, we could find ourselves caught in the surge. I trust your knowledge of this place, I said. And honestly, I don't see that we have many alternatives. Aika nodded, accepting my decision. She led me to a cluster of crystals near the archway, their structure more complex than those around them. They pulsed with an internal light that synchronized perfectly with the distant flashes from the maelstrom. These are conduit crystals, she explained. They channel and direct the maelstrom's energy. Breaking them will create a temporary power vacuum that the storm will rush to fill. She positioned her staff near a specific junction in the crystal formation. When I strike, be prepared to run. We will have minutes at most before the surge reaches this position. I readied myself, checking that our supplies were secure and my pistol was easily accessible. I'm ready. Aika closed her eyes briefly, the luminescent patterns on her skin brightening as if gathering energy. Then, with a swift, precisely calculated movement, she struck the crystal formation with her staff. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The crystal shattered with a sound like 1,000 glass bells breaking simultaneously. A pulse of energy radiated outward, causing the surrounding formations to vibrate with increasing intensity. In the distance, the geometric patterns of the maelstrom began to shift, a section of the storm stretching toward us like a probing finger. Now, Aika commanded, and we sprinted through the archway onto a plateau beyond. The scene before us was chaotic. The Temple of Judgment loomed in the distance, a massive structure of black stone and crystal that seemed to both absorb and reflect light in impossible ways. Between us and the temple, Syndicate operatives were scrambling to respond to the sudden change in the maelstrom, their attention drawn to the approaching energy surge. We used the confusion to our advantage, keeping low and using the scattered crystal formations for cover as we made our way toward the temple. The Syndicate forces were retreating from the advancing edge of the storm, regrouping closer to the temple itself. We had covered perhaps half the distance when a piercing alarm sounded. One of the operatives had spotted us and was alerting the others to our presence. "Run!" Aika shouted, abandoning stealth for speed. We sprinted across the open ground, energy blasts from Syndicate weapons striking the ground around us. The maelstrom was advancing faster now, the distortion in the air becoming more pronounced, crystal shards beginning to materialize and whirl in its leading edge. A massive figure detached itself from the group near the temple, moving to intercept us with inhuman speed. Even at a distance, I could tell this was Commander Vex. He was as Ica had described, taller than most Terith, his skin marked with corrupted soul grafts that glowed an angry red. His armor was unlike the standard Syndicate issue, more elaborate and clearly designed to enhance his natural abilities. "Keep going," Ica ordered me, her own pace increasing. "Reach the temple entrance. I will hold him off. We stay together," I insisted, but Ica was already changing course, moving to intercept Vex before he could reach me. I hesitated, torn between following her orders and not wanting to abandon her to face such a formidable opponent alone. The decision was made for me when a group of Syndicate operatives cut off my path to Ica, forcing me to veer toward the temple. Behind me, I heard the distinctive discharge of Ica's staff meeting Vex's weapon, some sort of energy blade that crackled with red lightning. The clash sent a shockwave across the plateau, powerful enough that I felt it even at a distance. I fought my way through the remaining operatives, my energy pistol proving surprisingly effective against their armor at close range. The training I'd received was paying off, muscle memory taking over as I disabled one operative after another. The maelstrom was gaining on us all now, the edge of the storm consuming everything in its path. Syndicate forces were retreating en masse, abandoning their positions to flee the advancing wall of crystal shards and energy. I reached the temple steps just as a particularly violent discharge from the maelstrom illuminated the entire plateau. In that flash of blue-white light, I saw Ica and Vex locked in combat, a deadly dance of speed and skill. Despite her injury, Ica was holding her own, her staff a blur of motion as she parried Vex's brutal attacks. But even from a distance, I could see that Vex was the stronger combatant. His corrupted soul grafts pulsed with malevolent energy, and each strike of his blade forced Ica further on the defensive. As I watched in horror, Vex feinted to the left, then delivered a powerful blow with his armored fist that caught Ica squarely in her injured side. She stumbled, momentarily off balance, and Vex pressed his advantage. His energy blade arced downward in what would surely be a killing stroke. Without conscious thought, I found myself running back down the temple steps, directly toward the combat. The maelstrom was closing in from behind, the air filled with crystal shards and electrical discharges, but all I could focus on was reaching Ica before Vex's blade fell. Time seemed to slow as I threw myself between them, arms outstretched as if I could somehow block the energy blade with my body alone. I saw Vex's eyes widen in surprise, saw the blade continue its downward arc toward my unprotected chest. The impact was like being struck by lightning. Pain exploded through my body, centered on my chest where the blade had connected. I felt myself flying backward, heard Ica's shout of alarm, saw the storm engulf Vex as I fell. And then, impossibly, I was on my feet again. The pain was excruciating, but I was alive. The energy blade had left a scorched path across my chest, burning through the environmental suit to the skin beneath, but I had survived a blow that should have cut me in half. Ica stared at me in disbelief, her silver eyes wide with shock. "The Deathforge protection," she murmured. Vex had been pushed back by the advancing edge of the maelstrom, forced to retreat with his remaining forces. The storm's intensity was increasing, the air around us so charged with energy that it made my skin tingle and the hairs on my arms stand on end. "The temple," Ica said urgently, pulling me toward the steps. "We must reach it before the storm consumes everything." We staggered up the temple steps together, each supporting the other. Ica's injury had reopened, luminescent blood staining her armor, while my chest burned with each breath. The massive doors of the temple stood closed before us, covered in intricate carvings and glowing runes. "Where do we get in?" I gasped as we reached the top step. Ica placed her hand against a specific pattern in the center of the doors. The luminescent markings on her skin pulsed in response, matching the rhythm of the runes on the door. With a deep, resonant tone, the massive doors began to swing inward. We stumbled inside, just as the full force of the maelstrom reached the temple. The doors swung shut behind us with a resounding boom, cutting off the howling storm and plunging us into near darkness. For a moment, we simply stood there, catching our breath in the sudden silence. Then, one by one, crystal formations embedded in the walls began to glow, illuminating a vast chamber with a domed ceiling that seemed to mirror the night sky of Tarith. In the center of the chamber stood a group of elder Tarith, their skin covered in the most elaborate soul grafts I had seen yet. They wore ceremonial robes rather than armor, and each carried a staff similar to Aika's but more ornate. "The arbiters," Aika whispered, straightening despite her injury. "They will judge your worthiness." Before I could respond, one of the elders stepped forward, his gaze moving from Aika to me with an expression of grave curiosity. "Guardian Aika," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "You have fulfilled your duty under the ancient law by bringing the Death Forge to the Temple of Judgment." His eyes fixed on me. "Now we shall see if he is worthy of the rare gift he has received." I met his gaze, aware that my future, perhaps my very life, hung in the balance of whatever test awaited me within these ancient walls. But I was no longer the frightened technician who had accidentally insulted a guardian. I had faced raiders and the Syndicate, survived the Dead Waste, and confronted Commander Vex himself. Whatever judgment came, I would face it with the same courage I had found in myself during our journey through the Waste. The Elder Arbiter gestured for us to follow him deeper into the temple, toward whatever trial would determine my fate. The central chamber of the Temple of Judgment was a circular space dominated by a pool of what appeared to be liquid crystal. The substance glowed with a soft blue-white light, its surface perfectly still despite the subtle movement visible beneath. Surrounding the pool was a series of raised platforms where the arbiters now took their positions, their staffs planted firmly before them. Aika and I were directed to stand at the edge of the pool. Her posture was formal once more, all traces of the camaraderie we had developed during our journey carefully masked in the presence of the arbiters. Yet when our eyes met briefly, I saw concern there, and something else, something that might have been respect. "Death Forged," intoned the lead arbiter, addressing me directly. "You stand before the pool of reflection, where all truths are revealed. Do you understand why you have been brought here? To be judged worthy or not?" I replied, my voice steady despite my apprehension. "Indeed, the ancient law is clear. One who survives the Moonclaw must prove their spirit is truly death-forged, not merely lucky." His silver eyes studied me intently. "The trial is simple. You will enter the pool. If your spirit is genuinely death-forged, you will emerge changed but alive. If not," he left the implication hanging. I glanced at Aika, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "What happens if I pass this test?" I asked the arbiter. "You will be recognized as death-forged, a rare designation among even our own people. Guardian Aika's obligation to you will be transformed from mere protection to sacred bond, and you will be granted certain rights among the Tarith not normally extended to off-worlders. And if I fail," the arbiter's expression remained impassive, "then Guardian Aika will complete what her Moonclaw began." The stakes couldn't have been clearer. I took a deep breath, wincing at the pain from my injured chest, and turned to face the pool. "Wait," Aika said, stepping forward. "Honorable arbiters, I request permission to speak before the trial begins." The lead arbiter inclined his head, granting permission. "This off-worlder has proven himself during our journey through the Dead Waste," Aika stated formally. "He fought honorably against raiders and syndicate forces. He demonstrated loyalty by refusing to abandon me when confronted by Commander Vex, despite my orders to proceed to the temple without me." Her voice remained steady, but I could hear the significance in her words. "Most notably, he placed himself between me and a killing blow from Vexblade, risking his own life to save mine." A murmur ran through the assembled arbiters at this revelation. "Is this true, Death Forged?" asked the lead arbiter, turning his penetrating gaze on me. "Aika saved my life multiple times during our journey," I replied honestly. I was simply returning the favor. Such an act transcends obligation, the arbiter observed. It speaks to character. He considered Ika's words for a moment, then nodded. Your testimony is noted, Guardian Ika. However, the trial must still proceed. The ancient law demands it. I stepped to the edge of the pool, studying the mysterious liquid crystal. Up close, I could see that the movement beneath the surface formed patterns similar to the soul grafts on Tereth's skin. Flowing, evolving, constantly changing, yet maintaining a fundamental harmony. Remove your environmental suit, instructed the arbiter. The pool must touch your flesh directly. I complied, stripping down to the simple undergarments I wore beneath the suit. The burn across my chest from Vex's energy blade was angry and red against my pale skin, while bruises from our various encounters mottled my arms and torso. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the pool. The liquid crystal was neither hot nor cold, or perhaps it was both simultaneously, a paradox my mind couldn't quite process. It flowed around my legs like water, but felt more substantial, almost like stepping into quicksilver. As I waded deeper, the substance rose to my waist, then my chest. The moment it touched the energy burn on my chest, something extraordinary happened. The patterns beneath the surface of the pool surged toward the wound, flowing up my body and spreading across my skin like living tattoos. Where they touched, I felt a strange sensation. Not pain, exactly, but a profound awareness, as if every cell in my body was suddenly conscious. The luminescent patterns continued to spread, flowing along my arms, up my neck, across my face. I could see them reflected in the pool's surface, designs similar to Tereth's soul grafts, but with subtle differences, adapting to human physiology while maintaining their essential nature. A warmth began to build within me, starting at the core of my being and radiating outward. The patterns on my skin pulsed in sync with my heartbeat, growing brighter with each pulse. The liquid crystal of the pool began to swirl around me, forming a vortex that lifted me slightly off the bottom. Images flashed through my mind, memories of Earth, of my journey to Tereth, of the moment I had called Ika cute. I saw our battle with the raiders, our confrontation with the exiles, my desperate race to intercept Vex's killing blow. But I also saw images that were my memories, ancient battles fought by guardian ancestors, the creation of the dead waste, the building of the temple itself. The vortex intensified, the liquid crystal now swirling up to form a cocoon around me. Through its translucent surface, I could dimly see the arbiters watching, their staffs raised and glowing in response to whatever was happening. I caught a glimpse of Ika, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. Then the cocoon closed completely, and I was suspended in nothingness, a void where time and space seemed to have no meaning. A voice spoke, though not with sound. It resonated directly within my consciousness. Death forged, it said, the concept rather than the word transmitting itself to me. Your spirit has been tested and found resilient beyond ordinary measure. The Moonclaw could not sever your connection to life, because that connection runs deeper than physical form. I tried to respond, but had no voice in this place between places. The one who struck you, Guardian Ika, is now bound to you not by obligation, but by spiritual resonance. Your spirits touched when a Moonclaw failed, creating a bond that transcends ordinary connections. Images flowed through my awareness. Ika and I fighting side by side, supporting each other through the dead waste, the moment I intercepted Vex's killing blow. But the images continued beyond my experiences, showing possibilities that hadn't yet occurred. Ika and I standing together against future threats, sharing knowledge, strengthening both our peoples through our unusual connection. This is the true nature of being death-forged, the voice continued. Not merely the ability to survive what should kill, but to forge new connections that would otherwise be impossible. This is why it is so rare and so valued. The void around me began to pulse with light, the nothingness giving way to the swirling patterns of the liquid crystal. I felt myself descending, the cocoon opening as my feet touched the bottom of the pool once more. As the liquid crystal flowed away from my body, I realized the patterns it had created on my skin remained faint, almost imperceptible traceries that resembled Tareth's soul graphs, but were uniquely adapted to human physiology. They pulsed once, twice, then faded from view, though I somehow knew they remained, invisible but present. I stepped out of the pool, feeling profoundly changed in ways I couldn't fully articulate. My injuries were healed, including the energy burn across my chest, leaving only faint silvery scars as evidence they had ever existed. The arbiters had lowered their staffs and were regarding me with expressions ranging from surprise to solemn approval. Ika stood where I had left her, her silver eyes wide as she took in my transformed appearance. "The trial is complete," announced the lead arbiter, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. "The Death Forged has been judged and found worthy." Ika stepped forward, her posture formal, but her expression softer than I had ever seen it. "What does this mean for my obligation under the ancient law?" "The obligation of protection is fulfilled," the arbiter replied. "It is transformed now into the bond of resonance, a connection recognized by our most sacred traditions. The Death Forged is now considered Tareth kin, though his form remains human." I looked down at my arms, seeing no visible trace of the luminescent patterns that had covered me moments before. "The markings, they disappeared. They have become part of you," explained the arbiter. "In times of need or strong emotion, they will manifest. But they're not soul graphs as we know them. There's something new, a bridge between human and Tareth essence." Before any further explanation could be offered, a deep rumble shook the temple. Dust and small crystal shards fell from the domed ceiling as the tremor intensified. "The Syndicate," Ika said urgently. "They must be attempting to breach the temple." The lead arbiter nodded grimly. "Commander Vex has grown bold indeed if he dares attack the Temple of Judgment itself." He turned to the other arbiters. "Prepare the temple's defenses. We must not allow the sacred space to be defiled." As the arbiters moved with surprising speed for their apparent age, the lead arbiter addressed us once more. "Guardian Ika, you and the Death Forge should depart through the temple's rear passage. It will lead you to the crystalline mesa beyond the reach of the maelstrom. From there, you can return to the city and warn the Guardian Council of Vex actions." Ika looked torn. "Honorable Arbiter, my duty as a guardian compels me to stay and defend the temple. Your duty now extends to protecting the knowledge the Death Forged represents," the arbiter countered. "This new connection between human and Tareth could transform our understanding of our own nature. It must be preserved." Another, stronger tremor shook the temple. This time, a distant explosion could be heard, followed by the distinctive sound of energy weapons. "Go," the arbiter commanded. "We will hold them here." Ika bowed deeply, then turned to me. "We must hurry. The rear passage is this way." As I hastily donned my environmental suit, now repaired by whatever process had healed my injuries, I asked, "Won't they need every guardian they can get to defend against Vex?" "The arbiters are far more powerful than they appear," Ika replied, leading me down a corridor that branched off from the main chamber. "They rarely engage in direct combat, but when they do," she left the implication hanging. We moved swiftly through the temple's interior, passing chambers filled with ancient artifacts and walls covered in inscriptions I couldn't read. The sounds of battle grew more distant as we descended a spiraling ramp that seemed to be carved directly from the heart of a massive crystal. "What did you experience in the pool?" Ika asked as we continued our descent. The arbiters seemed surprised by the outcome. "I'm not sure I can describe it fully," I admitted. "There was a voice, or maybe not a voice exactly, but a presence. It spoke of connections between us, between our peoples." I glanced at her. It said our spirits touched when the moonclaw failed, creating some kind of bond. Ika's luminescent patterns pulsed slightly faster at my words. "The bond of resonance is mentioned in our oldest texts, but it was thought to be metaphorical, not literal. No guardian in recorded history has experienced it directly." She looked at me with new intensity. You continue to defy expectations, Death Forged. You could use my actual name, you know, I said with a small smile. Now that I've passed the trial and all. For the first time since we'd met, Ika's expression softened into what was unmistakably a smile. Very well, Matthew. Hearing my name on her lips sent an unexpected warmth through me. Before I could respond, we reached the bottom of the spiral ramp and emerged into a small chamber. A single crystal door stood at the far end, unmarked but radiating a subtle energy I could somehow sense now. As Ika approached the door, it responded to her presence, sliding open to reveal a narrow tunnel illuminated by the same bioluminescent crystals we had seen throughout the temple. This passage will take us beneath the maelstrom's influence and emerge on the crystalline mesa, Ika explained. From there, we can signal for transport back to the city. We entered the tunnel, the door sliding shut behind us with a soft hum. The passage stretched ahead, curving gently downward before beginning a gradual ascent. We walked in companionable silence for some time, each processing the events and revelations of the past days. I owe you an apology, Ika said suddenly, breaking the silence. When we first met, I reacted with excessive force to your comment. I did not consider the cultural differences or your lack of knowledge regarding our customs. And I owe you an apology for speaking without thinking, I replied. Though if I hadn't, we might never have discovered this bond between us. Ika considered this. Perhaps that is why the ancient law exists as it does. Perhaps the Moonclaw's purpose is not merely judgment, but discovery, a test to reveal those rare connections that transcend ordinary boundaries. The tunnel began to slope more steeply upward, and natural light became visible ahead, the exit to the crystalline mesa. As we approached the end of the passage, Ika stopped, turning to face me. From a compartment in her armor, she withdrew a small object, a medallion of some crystalline material, inscribed with patterns that matched the now invisible markings the pool had left on my skin. The warrior crest, she explained, holding it out to me. It is traditionally given to those who have earned a guardian's respect and trust. As Taerith kin, you have more than earned it. I accepted the medallion, feeling its weight in my palm. It pulsed once with inner light, responding to my touch. I'm honored, I said, genuinely moved by the gesture. Were it always, Ika instructed. It will identify you as under guardian protection to all Taerith, and it will help you focus the energy of your new markings when they manifest. I slipped the medallion over my head, where it rested against my chest, a comfortable weight that seemed to resonate with something deep within me. As it settled, I felt a momentary surge of the same energy I had experienced in the pool, a brief illumination of the invisible patterns on my skin. Ika nodded in approval. The crest recognizes you. That is good. We continued to the tunnel's exit, emerging onto the crystalline mesa, a vast plateau overlooking the dead waste from the opposite side of where we had entered. From this vantage point, we could see the maelstrom still raging around the temple, though it seemed to be slowly subsiding. In the distance, the spires of the Taerith city glinted in the light of the twin suns, now beginning their descent toward the horizon. Ika activated a signaling device from her equipment, sending a beacon that would bring Guardian transport to our location. As we waited, standing side by side, overlooking the alien landscape, I felt a profound sense of connection, not just to Ika, but to this strange, beautiful, dangerous world. What happens now? I asked, with this bond of resonance between us. Ika turned to me, her silver eyes reflecting the crystalline landscape around us. That is for us to determine. The ancient texts speak of death-forged individuals bringing great change to Taerith society, challenging old assumptions, forging new paths. A hint of her new smile touched her lips. Given your propensity for speaking without thinking, I have no doubt you will live up to that legacy. I laughed, the sound echoing across the mesa. And what about Commander Vex and the Syndicate? They're not going to give up easily. No, Ika agreed, her expression growing serious once more. Vex will see you as an even greater prize now, and a greater threat to his power. The journey ahead will not be easy. But we'll face it together, I said, not as a question, but a statement of fact. Yes, Ika replied, the luminescent patterns on her skin pulsing with quiet intensity. Together, in the distance, a guardian transport appeared, its sleek form cutting through the golden violet light of Taritha's sunset. As it approached, I thought about the extraordinary series of events that had led me to this moment. From a careless comment to a death blow, from enemy to protector, from outsider to Tarithkin. I touched the warrior crest on my chest, feeling the subtle energy it channeled. You know, I said casually as the transport drew nearer, you're still pretty cute when you smile. Ika's eyes widened momentarily before she recognized the teasing in my tone. Then, to my delight, she laughed, a sound as musical and unexpected as crystal bells ringing in the dead waste. And you, Matthew the Death Forged, she replied, are still far too reckless with your words. But perhaps that is not entirely a bad thing. As the transport landed on the mesa before us, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, syndicate attacks, Commander Vex Vendetta, or the simple complexity of bridging two different cultures, the bond forged between us would be equal to them all. From accidental insult to profound connection, from near death to new life. Our journey was just beginning, and I couldn't wait to see where it would lead.